This is the Simpit. I'm your host, Sean Cole, and welcome to the Sim Tunnel, where it's really about you, the pit crew, and our ability to talk about various different topics in sim racing, talk about them in great detail, take our time, and really look at every aspect of whatever the topic is, and talk about it till we've just exhausted all of our thoughts. Today's topic is one that's near and dear to all of our hearts, and that is real life versus sim racing. And a lot of us have done some real life racing and dabbled in it in certain levels, and a lot of us have certain perceptions of what sim racing should feel like or be like when we think about how it compares to real life racing. And it's a great topic just for us sim racers, but I thought it would be even better to get somebody who has real life experience, extensive real life experience, and then has kind of shifted to a sim racing career, which means they're going to have the ultimate opinion, far superior to my opinion, that is, on this particular topic. And that's why I asked Richie Hearn to be here today, and that way he has an extensive racing career. He was an Atlantic champion in '95. He went on to race in kart for many years, finished third in the Indy 500. This guy knows racing. He's a driving instructor to this day. He knows cars, he knows racing, and more importantly, he has started being a very active sim racer, and I thought he'd be the perfect person to talk to. So let's bring him on the show today. And welcome, Richie. Welcome to the show. Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I can't wait.
How you doing? How you doing today?
Just doing great. Just kind of sitting here in the morning waiting for this to start.
Very cool. Well, from a friend of ours, Michael Thompson, I'm going to thank him. He kind of set this up, and I know he's one of your sim racing buddies. And before we get to that, though, I mean, I know you started in karting. I'm assuming your father got you into racing way back when?
Yeah, actually, my mom and my dad both raced Corvettes, just kind of SCCA amateur stuff out at old Riverside Raceway. And it's just kind of natural for me to get into it. And when I was 7, my dad got me a go-kart and made me practice for a full year before I was quick enough to race. And then I just never stopped.
Awesome. And that just led to moving up the ladder, and so on?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty into it. I mean, I did nothing else until I was 18 but race every weekend. And, I didn't have the money to move up, but I was fortunate enough to meet the right people. I won the Winfield School in France there. I was only the second American to win that. And that got me, I raced over there for a year in Formula Renault. And then just the way things happen, when I got my chance, I made the most of it. And, just kind of things came together.
Well, when you think about being an Atlantic champion, I mean, some of the biggest names in all of motorsports really have been Atlantic champions at various times.
Yeah, I mean, that was probably, people ask me all the time, what was your favorite car to drive? And back then it was the Ralt RT41, and it was probably the most enjoyable race car I've ever driven. It was just fast enough to scare you, but you could really kind of manhandle it around. And the championship was really strong back then, and we raced at all the kart events, and it was just winning my first race at Long Beach Grand Prix, because I grew up in Southern California. I think that was '94, and it was quite a lot of fun.
Awesome. And then, I mean, how when you win a championship in Atlantic, is it automatic that you get a ride in Indycar?
Yeah, no, there's always money involved, and I was fortunate enough with the team with Della Penna Motorsports at that time. We were sponsored by Food for Less and Ralph's Supermarkets, and that company wanted to go to IndyCar, so I was fortunate enough the whole team moved up, and then eventually we got the Budweiser backing, and so it was just kind of the things. I was just in the right place at the right time. I mean, I had plenty of friends that were just as fast as me that maybe just didn't get the opportunity that I got, and I tell everybody, you just gotta, when you get the opportunity, you gotta be willing to go for it. So every time my first test in an Indy car was with old Pac West. It was actually Scott Sharp's car at Firebird Raceway. And I remember when I got in that car, I was either going to total it or be the fastest guy. And so you got to be willing to risk it. And fortunately, I didn't total it. And, those little things are just what kind of keep your name in front of people's minds.
Sure, and it makes total sense. If you went out and just did an average job, nobody would take any notice. It would have been just for the fun of it versus crash or burn versus total victory. It makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, yeah, absolutely. When my first test with Della Penna in the Atlantic car, he had a couple of drivers he was looking at, and we went to Sears Point or Sonoma Raceway, and I remember back then that nobody was able to go flat out through turn 10 in the Atlantic car, and I was determined to do it. And I remember in my mind, I'm like, well, if I total this thing, I don't care. It's not my car. I can't, he invited me. I can't pay for it. So, and I was able to do it, and it was just those little extra steps you're willing to extend yourself that team owners look for. And, you don't want to crash all the time, but if you don't crash once in a while, you're definitely not pushing. And, fortunately, like I say, I was always in the right place at the right time.
I think a lot of that's going to come back as relevant topics when we get into the sim racing phase of this. All right, I could talk real life racing all day long, but again, I'm a sim racing show. So when did you start sim racing?
Actually, funny or not, I actually started when Indycar, Pitcrew came out with the Indycar game long time ago. This is like, late 90s. And, so I used to use that as some training. I mean, obviously back then that was the game to have. And, compared to what we have now, it's completely, different. But, and then I got away from it. And then about 4 years ago, I was, my roommate, who I race with now on my sim racing team, Brandon Chappell, he had iRacing. And I told him, he's like, hey, you got to try it. And I'm like, yeah. I know if I try that, I'm going to never want to stop. So I tried it, and then I ended up just buying my own stuff and haven't stopped since.
Awesome. So back in the 90s, you were still racing when you were doing the Indycar. Did you tell other pro drivers that you were playing simulator at home?
No. No, I use that as my own special tool. It was really good training especially for like some of the street circuits that we go to that you don't get a chance to practice with. I mean, the setup part of the car was not really relevant, but just getting the familiarization with the tracks beforehand, I thought, I always felt when I was able to do that, the first practice session out, I was pretty much right on top of it instead of trying to learn the track again. And I used it a lot. I had a lot of fun with it.
Awesome. So nowadays, talking to Michael, I mean, you guys take some of your sim racing pretty seriously.
Yeah, I take it. My girlfriend, laughs about it, but I keep telling her, do not ever call this a game. And so we take it pretty seriously. We race with the Pacific Major Series on iRacing, and it's pretty awesome. They do a great job. We have our own team, Elite West Racing, and I spend hundreds of hours practicing. And I get just as mad when I do bad as I would in real life. And I get pretty disappointed and depressed and pretty excited when we do well. So it's quite a hobby.
So it taps into some of those same mental and even some of those exhilaration moments of real life racing.
Oh, absolutely. And we talked about this a little bit before, but I mean, the physical aspects are never going to be there, unless somebody's going to sit there and hit you with a baseball bat when you crash. You don't have that fear, but you have the fear of failure, and you have the fear of disappointment when you actually put all this effort into it. And, when these races start, I'm sweating, I'm nervous, just like I watched your race last night, and, you really put a lot of effort, and it's really, you get the emotional connection, I think, more than anything, that when you can't do it for real, that emotional connection to what you're doing and the satisfaction is all the same. It's 100% the same.
Sure. I mean, I scream when I win and I cry when I lose, and I think that would be the same in real life or in sim.
Oh, absolutely. I've punched my steering wheel a few times, more than I'm screaming out loud, and it's for people who don't do it, maybe it looks funny, but it's pretty intense.
Absolutely. So I know everyone's going to want to ask, so before we get to the topic again, what's your sim rig? What do you race on?
I have an 80/20 rig, which is pretty awesome, that some friends actually built for me as a gift. And I use the Oculus Rift, and I use just the basic, the old CV2 pedals, I think they're called, the Fanatec, the CSL. I don't know all the terms. And I use the Thrustmaster TX300 with the Ferrari Formula One wheel, and button box and all that stuff. And for me, the biggest thing that I enjoy is when the Rift came out. For me, that's I know the triple screens are good, and the resolution's much better. I think that's going to get better as we get going. But the immersion of being in the car with the Rift and the depth perception of driving in a three-dimensional world is really close to what you would experience in a real car.
Did you do much racing before you had the Rift?
Yeah, I did. Before the Rift came out, I ran just on a single monitor, and it was good. But when I tried the Rift for the first time, I've never gone back to the monitor. And I always thought, kind of before I paid for the Rift, should I get triple monitors or not? But once you do that immersion, and I think that's the one thing the monitors don't give you is that 3D dimensional world. And I know it's not for everybody, and the resolution's not as good as that. And I think in the future it will be. But for me, just being in the car and like having everything right there, be able to look left, right, and it's just and you're kind of blacked out from everything, So I tell everybody, if you want to rob me, you rob me come to my house during that time, I'll never even know you're there. And that is unrivaled with just having the monitors.
Different direction here, but now when I'm on triple screens even, I find that I'm very focused and I get this tunnel vision in sim racing that I do not get when I've driven like go-karts, for example. And that, in karts, obviously I lead with my eyes and my head will turn to follow, looking for apex as an example. But in sim racing, I tend to get this very like tunnel visioned in, and I'm not turning my head for apex like I think I should. Do you find a big difference between the fixed monitor and Oculus in that respect?
And yeah, that's a good point. I think I tell everybody, when you're using a monitor, you're still in that two-dimensional world. You're still kind of trying to guess a little bit, and you tend to fixate right in front of you. Whereas with the Rift, and you kind of can look, it just becomes more natural. When I first started with it, I still did the same thing. I drove just like you. I just drove straight ahead and didn't look through the corner. And then you eventually start learning how to drive like you really would. And, hopefully in the future, the resolution gets better. I mean, there's still a little bit of a screen door effect, but you kind of have to look past it a little bit for the rest of the positives.
Absolutely. When you're at high speed in a car, how well, I've only, go-kart, so what have I done, 85? When you're going 200 miles an hour, is your vision impaired?
No, it teaches you to look really far ahead, that's for sure. I know at 220 miles an hour, we're going 100 yards a second, basically. So, and that's really evident at a place like Indy where the corners are really long. And you tend to kind of just, it's kind of like flying in a plane. You don't really, you don't really realize how fast you're going, and everybody else is going that fast until you decide to hit something. So the first part is learning to realize, like, man, I'm going pretty damn fast here. And your senses are just completely out of whack and heightened and everything. And you just kind of get used to it. I mean, if I jumped in a car, I haven't been in an Indycar in 10 years. If I jumped in one right now, I'd probably be completely blown away. But after a while, it just becomes kind of a natural thing.
Sure. And how does the speed immersion in a real-life car versus speed immersion in sim racing compare?
That's probably the one thing that's tough to compare. It's never going to be the same. You can tell you're going fast, but you don't have the wind and the actual feel and the G-forces, and that's something that you kind of have to just imagine, I guess. So it's never going to be quite there. I think part of it is the actual fear of, when you hit the wall at 230 miles an hour and, you go back out there, that sense of fear is there, and you're never going to get that in sim racing. Although the first time I did put the Rift on and I was driving the Indycar, I don't know where I was, and the first time it swung around and I went head on to the wall, it freaked me out. I kind of let go of the steering wheel like you would in real life, and so maybe it's a little bit, but it's never going to be there.
Right. Call me sick, but I actually would like the seat that gives me just a little bit of electrical voltage when I crash.
Sure.
Like I'm okay with a little bit of consequences for the actions that add the realism a little bit.
And it should be. And in real racing, anybody can go out there and drive, pretty quick, but, not everybody can go beyond that. And, the first time I went to Indy in 96, you had to go, and if you weren't going flat out through turn one, we were going 235 miles an hour back then. If you couldn't go flat through turn one, you weren't going to be fast. And, it took me 2 days of practice to be able to do that, because you almost had to commit to dying almost. It sounds weird, but you just say, I don't care. And the first time you do it, okay, I can do this. But to get over that hump takes a lot of commitment. And, that's one thing in sim racing, you'll never have that. And, it's not everybody can do it.
Sure. So, I would imagine you mentioned the fear coming back to haunt you kind of aspect. And so if you even get a little twitch doing that in one, I'm assuming the next time by you're not nearly as prepared as you were the 2 laps earlier.
You just gotta, you gotta believe in yourself a little bit, and you just gotta, there's 2 types of oval drivers, we used to say, those that have hit the wall and those are about to. And when somebody hits the wall, you always go out and watch them again. And if they can just do it, not let it phase them, then they're good. But some people can't. And, I was always willing. I didn't care. Now I care. But when you're in your 20s, I could care less if I got hurt or not. I wanted to be the best, and it takes a little bit of that commitment. And, Senna was always my hero. And that was one thing that I always admire about him, is he could care less, but he's gonna go past that limit and believe in himself. And that's the one way I kind of adopted when I was driving.
Yeah, I remember hearing references to the way he would drive 11 tenths and then try to tone it back to a controllable level versus so many others who would go conservative and then try to build up speed throughout the laps.
Yeah, nobody wins being conservative.
You talked about just throwing it all out there, like in that test session way back when. In sim racing, we can kind of throw it at that 11 tenths all the time with no consequences, but it doesn't always get us the results that we want. Where do you find the boundary in being able to just excessively push it but still bring home the results you want? I know you're a highly competitive person, so finishing is the only way to win.
Yeah, you got to just temper it. When you go out and race on the iRacing or whatever the races you do, you go and practice. Let's say and you crash, so what? Or you clip the wall, you get your little 1X or whatever. But then when you have to go qualify, and now you can't do that, then how intense does it really get? And it's kind of the same thing. I get that adrenaline rush of just pushing it right to the limit without going over, because you don't get a chance to do it again. Obviously, in real life, you crash the car, but in that, you don't get a reset in qualifying. And so it's, it's still there. The feeling's still there for all that. And you got to learn how to control yourself. And that series we run, the Pacific Majors, he does full length races, and you can't make those mistakes, and so you really have to kind of focus. And I get a lot of satisfaction out of it.
Absolutely. Earlier you were talking about G-forces and how that's not there. Obviously, we'll never get anything that can give us G-forces. Well, at least without a spinning motion system. Force feedback to me comes in a lot of layers in the steering wheel, and some of it are car effects. Is there any sensation of G-force in it? And I want to talk about force feedback quite a bit, but is one of the things they're giving you in the wheel a sensation of G-force, or is it purely just the mechanics?
I think it's just more the mechanics. Some of the systems now they have are pretty good, where you can really feel the bumps in the road and the crown or whatever, and the curbs, and it gives you some sense of the limits of the grip, but you're never really getting the full effect of, when you're going through a corner and what it does to your body and pushing you into the seat and things like that. I almost don't think they're ever going to be able to replicate that. Maybe in a $50,000 system, but even then it's not the same. And so it's just something that you kind of have to just sensitize to yourself, I guess is the word to use. But the way that the wheels are, I don't have a direct drive wheel. I hear that's pretty amazing. I know Michael has one, and my other teammate Brandon has one. And it's probably my next step is getting one of those, but being able to feel the level of grip through the tires and things like that. But you're never going to get that seat of the pants in your butt of the car actually losing control and be able to find that fine limit just through your body. You're just going to have to just kind of use your mind a little bit.
Sure. And as far as the mechanic side goes, so I mean, now I always talk when I do reviews of wheels about how between the game is what's outputting the physics, the game is what's interpreting those messages, and that they all, I mean, all in 2017, even at the lowest level, they all understand certain principles of racing. How effectively does the wheel replicate just the sensation of like going loose or going, massive oversteer, or locking up the wheel and losing traction and certain effects like that we as sim racers depend on?
I think it's pretty close, actually. I'd say it's probably 90% of what you would normally feel. Especially nowadays, you can get the programs to kind of fine tune it a little bit. For that TX 300, I mean, what is it, $300? I mean, it's a pretty good, and I think that, like I said, you can kind of fine tune it, and you can really feel the wheel lock up. You can feel the bumps. You can feel the loss of grip in the tires. Some of that comes with constantly updating the tire model itself, and that's always getting better. So, I think it's pretty good, actually.
You mentioned tires. Let's go there for a moment. So it kind of goes and combines with the force feedback. I know you've driven a wide variety of cars, and I'm sure every car and tire is different, but how much feeling, like a lot of people get critical of like tire flex and how much they think they should feel that. How much is the tire directly to the wheel versus the car's balance to the wheel, and the center of gravity and what's going on with the car's movement?
Well, I think the tire is everything because it's the only thing hitting the ground that's holding you on the pavement, and that tire flex thing is pretty right on. You can't feel that going through the corner and you feel the tire rolling over, and those are things that when you're driving a real car that you can bring to your engineers and go, I just feel the tire rolling over, and you don't really get that in the sim. Maybe someday they will. I don't know how important it is to really get the satisfaction of driving it, but people are looking. I know people. I get on see the forums, and people are very critical, and I always say, it's pretty damn good. From where it's been and to where it's going. It's only going to get better, and it's pretty complicated to make that just right. And when you're racing for real, the tire model is always changing anyways, and for them to try to keep up on that is pretty tough. But I think on some cars it feels good, some cars it doesn't. I think the biggest thing that is lacking is the feel of cold tires to hot tires. Is not quite there. Hopefully it'll get there.
What about tire fall off?
Yeah, that's another thing. I think that in the real world that you can feel that happen a little bit differently, and the way you drive the car is more effective to that than you do in the sim. In the sim, it's pretty linear. It's pretty much going to do it or not. And I think that the tire heating model is not quite right. And, iRacing came out with obviously the track, the dynamic track surfaces, and that's pretty good. It's not great, but I think it's gonna get better as we play along here.
Sure. Now, what about setup? I mean, I'm not sure how much. I mean, going through the ranks in the ladder system, it's hard to not get pretty knowledgeable. But I know you're not, or I don't know. But I mean, you were a driver, not the race engineer. How do you feel about the setups and the components that we can change, the way we can change them, and more importantly, how the car reacts to the changes?
I think it's pretty good, actually. I mean, it's surprisingly, like in the Indycar, I'll probably talk about more, even though I race all the cars, but that's my experience is just learning how to do the little trim tabs and the little flaps and stuff. It really affects the car just like it really would, the center of balance and getting the ride heights just right. I think it's, engineering wise, I'm not an engineer. I never really was. I was always the type of driver who would just come in and go tell them, hey, here's what I want the car to do. Here's what it's doing that I don't like. You go fix it and then tell me what I should feel, and I'll come back and forth to that. So I was never quite an engineer. So maybe I struggle a little bit with on the game as being just the only guy trying to set the car up. It takes me, I have the data systems and I sit there staring at that screen for hours trying to figure it out. And I think it's really close to what you would feel in the real world, and maybe not all cars. Right now we're getting ready to run Bathurst this weekend, so I've done a lot of work with the V8 supercar, and some of the stuff just doesn't seem right. Doesn't mean it isn't. I'm impressed with how the shocks reflect on what you would think in the real world and effects in the game are really spot on. But in the real world, I can also go, you know what, I want the shock to do this, and we could take it off, revalve it, and make it do that. Whereas I think on the game, it's a little bit too limited.
Right.
Although I don't want to see it get that complicated because I don't want to spend that much time on it.
Right.
But it's pretty close. I'd say it's probably, like in the Indycar, I'd say it's probably a good 90 to 95%. And maybe in some other cars, maybe it's probably down in the 60 to 70%. And obviously, they're limited in the time they can spend with these cars and getting them. But it's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Do you ever send your data to like old engineering buddies saying, just take a look, please, please?
I probably could, because Motec system, I don't use it. I have it, but it's like way more complicated than I want to get into. But I know I could probably send that data right to some of my old engineers, and they could read it and probably help me out. And, so that's pretty impressive that you can it correlate directly straight across the board. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody in the chat is asking, I like this question, but so what's the scariest turn in real life that you've ever taken?
It's turn 1 at Indy by far. It's the most satisfying to get right, and it's probably the scariest. And a lot of it is because you're just going down this tunnel, and you have one chance to get it right. That's the thing that Indy is like. The corners are so long that you want to turn in early because you can't really see the exit. But if you turn in early, there's no coming out of it because you just don't have the time to correct. You can't just get on the brakes and make it happen. And so every time you come down that straightaway, you really have to be on your game and hit it just right. You can't turn in late. You can't turn in early. You can't lift. You have this one fine line to get right. And it's funny how that track is all 4 corners you approach so differently, but it's that one corner, and it's just the visual part because you can't see it. And the way the wind's blowing, a lot of the time the wind is blowing right into turn 1. So if you turn in, it's going to pin the front of the car. And so there's a lot to process there. I mean, there's other turns. The kink at Road America, trying to go flat through there at 200 miles an hour takes a severe amount of commitment. Same type of thing. Some of the street courses like in Australia, the back S's where you have to go jump the curbs and stuff. It's pretty cool. Probably the scariest is probably Indy by far.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's certainly the fastest you're gonna do.
Yeah.
In real life, and I guess in the sim as well, how much do you compare things that like in-car adjustments, like weight jacker, anti-roll bar, brake bias? How actively are you making those changes in real life, and are you making those same changes in sim?
Absolutely. I mean, some cars it's a big deal. I mean, if you go run the Skip Barber car, it doesn't really matter. You just drive it. But, when we were our Indy 500 race this year, and we were qualifying, the way the wind was blowing, just like in real life, you go down one straightaway, you might bump the weight jacker up, and then you go down the other way, you might bump every lap, every corner, you're doing something different. It's a little easier in the sim because, everything's right there, and you don't have, other forces going on. But, yeah, absolutely. You're always kind of calculating this in your mind and trying to feel the car. I think it's actually probably harder in the sim because, like I say, you don't have that seat of the pants. It's more of like you're trying to figure it out, trying to feel what you do. And so it's almost a little bit harder, but it's all the same. Definitely all the same.
All right. Another question from our chat is, who's the toughest guy you ever raced against?
That's a good question, actually. I mean, when I was running back in, kart, in the 90s, I think, obviously, you had the Zanardis and the Vassars and the Tracys of the world, and they were all tough. There were some I didn't want to race with because they were kind of jerks or they were dirty, and so there was people that you kind of race differently with around. I mean, there were people that were definitely harder to pass than others, and I never could say like one exact person. It's just they were all pretty good. And that was the beauty of kart back in the 90s. I think it was probably the best time that IndyCar racing had. because everybody was pretty awesome, and you had to be pretty much. It didn't matter if you were running for 15th or running for 5th or 1st. It was all in really, really tough, really tough whoever you were with.
Did you have any personal rivalries that just like each week it didn't matter? Obviously, the win is the win, and going for that is the ultimate. But there's that one guy that I just got to beat him every week, or I'm going to be hearing about it or dealing with it.
I probably had more of that back when I was in the Atlantics, and it was Patrick Carpentier, and I really actually hated him back then. Now we became really good friends, and he's a super cool guy. But he raced for a rival team that we absolutely needed to beat, and even my owner hated them. And so, I pulled some pretty dirty moves on him. I wasn't the cleanest driver. I wouldn't take somebody out, but I wouldn't make it easy. Once you got to IndyCar, you kind of just had to race yourself more than everybody else, and there's a lot more going on than just one single guy. But you always had people that you didn't like, and I don't want to name names and stuff. But there's one person where it's pretty satisfying to beat, and that's what drove you though. That's why not. That's the way it should be.
Do you have any online rivalries now that you're sim racing?
In our series here, we have. I'm more into the team concept, so we have the Alliance Racing guys that we're always trying to beat, and they're pretty damn fast. And then you got Blake Reynolds. He runs in that series, and he's impossible to beat. So when you're faster than him, it's cool, but it's more friendly. I mean, you can't make it personal, and otherwise it takes some of the fun out of it at this level. We're not doing it for a living, so it's more friendly rivalries. At least I try to keep it that way.
Sure. So earlier on, you started talking a little bit about the intensity of the competition and being even nervous getting into a race. When you show up to a real-life race weekend, you go through certain steps to prepare. How do you compare that to how you set up and prepare for an event in iRacing or any other sim for that matter?
I think in the real world, obviously, there's a much more physical part of it, where you got to make sure you eat right, drink enough fluids, just mentally just kind of get in the moment. There's a lot of outside factors, interviews, just sponsors, stuff that you don't have in the sim world. But in the sim world, when you're going to race a 4-hour race, obviously you don't want to have to go to the bathroom in the middle of it. Want to make sure you have your fluids ready and things like that. And, make sure you got your air conditioner right and all that stuff. So there's little things, but I think it's more mentally getting ready, because it's easier on the sim to kind of just let your mind wander. And I find that very challenging to kind of just focus on that. Everybody in my household, leave me alone, 4 hours. And, so I think that's very similar. But I think in the real world that just the actual physical factors force you to focus. Where on the sim world, it's more, you got to really kind of remember, hey, we're going to do this. I got my big race tomorrow. So, can't wake up and have a couple beers and stuff like that. So you got to be ready for it. So
right.
I kind of enjoy that as well.
Do you find yourself able to even get to the same concentration level in sim as you can in real life?
Yeah, I think, and like I said, I think it's harder because it's easy, because you're kind of just sitting there and just driving along. It's easy to start thinking about something else. You're looking at your, intervals and thinking about your fuel numbers and all this stuff. Or in the real world, you're just driving. You got other people figuring that out. So, I probably think that's my biggest weakness is I make dumb mistakes sometimes because I'm thinking about, what am I going to have for dinner afterwards and stuff like that. And so I find that challenging to just really kind of focus right on what I was doing. But it's very similar. It's it's fun that way.
Is there any reason that an alien or incredible sim racer shouldn't be able to hop in a real car and perform?
No, but at the same time, can they get out there and be willing to hurt themselves and do it, and it's not everybody can jump over that cliff, and when you're standing at the cliff looking at the water below, can you just say, screw it, I'm going to do it and I don't care what happens? Not everybody can jump. As far as the technical part, and driving the car in the field, I think yes, for sure. But can they do it and risk it all, risk crashing the car, not just personal injury, but financial injury with the team and disappointment. I mean, there's so many people, hoping that you do well. Can you put that all out of your mind and go out there and give 10 tenths? And we've seen instances with it, obviously with the GT Academy and all that stuff. Some of those guys have done pretty good. Yeah. It takes a lot of practice, just like anything.
Yeah. From my perspective, just about every sim racer who's gotten an opportunity has actually probably exceeded the expectations of the real life people. And maybe even sim racers, but especially GT Academy, it's like, some of them have gone on to incredible careers.
Yeah. So absolutely. I mean, that's probably the future of motorsports. You might see more guys coming into racing, and their main experience is from something like this, because this is cheap, right? Even go-kart racing is expensive. To run at the top level, it's expensive. And so this might reach a little bit deeper into the talent pool, and you might see a little bit more in the future of people like, what's your background? Well, my background is sim racing, and I think that that's only going to help auto racing more in the future.
Well, and you could make the argument, I mean, go-karting, I know 20, 30 years ago, go-karting had a perfect spot on the ladder system because it was cheap, and it was mostly fathers taking their kids out. But then it became the era of haulers and team efforts, and all of a sudden you're looking at race budgets that can rival, like Star Mazda level budgets and higher levels of racing. And at this point, you might not have that G-force. You might not know whether you can jump off the cliff, as you put it, fear factor level. But not only will you have the understanding of racecraft, not only will you understand racing etiquette from sim racing, but you'll actually also be miles ahead on the setup wisdom, because it's kind of hard to get anywhere without some setup knowledge in sim racing at this point.
Well, absolutely. And nothing replaces just practice. And that's the beauty of this. I can get on here and practice as much as I want for free almost. And, that's where I think as the younger generation comes along, you're going to see a lot of these the kids be way ahead of the game as far as technical aspects, race craft, like you say, than if they just got out there and just were able to get in a go-kart, a couple times a month. And, that's one thing that, like I say, I think is going to see a little bit more in the future. And hopefully, teams look into that a little bit more, and look into, that talent pool a little bit and give some of these guys a chance and let them try it out sometimes. And I think you'll see it. I think some of with the McLaren thing going on and stuff like that, they're already starting to reach into that talent pool. And hopefully, you might see some kid racing Indy cars or Formula One, and his main background started here with this stuff. And that'd be very cool.
Yeah. And I've been waiting. You mentioned going back to the days of Papyrus, and it's like, I've been waiting for this point where not just an acceptance, but that they understood the power of sim racing. And you talked about learning some tracks, and I think about Max Verstappen, and I think that kid hadn't been to half of the tracks he went to and had to be at Formula One pace the day he got there. And the only way he was able to learn those layouts and not waste time and waste cars was by sim racing. And,
absolutely.
And that's just learning the track, let alone all the other benefits that I think are there. Real life racing is just now starting to accept even,
and that's cool. Like I say, I think that's going to get even more in the future. The way they laser scan the tracks and everything, it's pretty realistic. And, it only helps with your processing in your mind when you get there for the first time. It's one less thing you have to think about, and you can focus on, it'd be like a golfer, being a professional golfer, and he can just play that course virtually over and over again. And when he gets out there for the first time, he already knows it, and he can focus on just the strokes and stuff. And I think that's, like I say, that's only going to get better.
Yeah. Now, I think all the things that it takes, the makeup to make a great race car driver, and I even think of how they compare or overlap with sim racing. So, obviously, you talked about diet. To be in an Indycar, you have to be incredibly fit. To be a sim racer, you don't have to be, but I believe that a lot of my edge, a lot of my ability to need to beat somebody comes from a certain amount of fitness and conditioning. Like just part of that mental attitude. I mean, obviously I don't need to sustain the G-forces. I don't need to be able to survive a wreck as, the same where strength, but do you believe that fitness has anything to do with that, like manly need to win and be competitive?
I think a little bit. I mean, the racing game is so it's pretty much all mental, being focused, and if you're, out of shape per se, and doesn't mean you have to be in great shape. I'm not going to go out and run a marathon anytime soon. But I definitely, before my race tomorrow, I'm going to make sure I drink enough water. I eat a certain time. I don't want to be, and stuff like that. And it's not as intense, but I don't want that bothering me, halfway through the race, and worrying about that. So it's a little bit, but it's probably 20% of what it really is, because you're never going to get physically tired driving one of these things in the sim, but, mentally exhausted. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, when it came to real life racing, were you much into the mental aspects as far as, did you ever do meditation, or you see skiers doing this at the top of the slope before they go down the run, visualizing it? Did you ever do any of that kind of stuff?
No. I was more of just get in the car and go type of guy. I worked out, but only because I had to. I wasn't really a big into that. Some of those guys were much more into it, and I didn't have a special diet. I mean, I just knew what to eat was good and bad. I think maybe a little bit. I mean, that was a long time ago. It was 20 years ago. It's obviously advanced much more than that. And I would try to, but I was more seat of the pants type of guy, and I would just try to listen to some cool music and just get in the car and go. And maybe in the end I could have done better at that, but that just wasn't me. And nowadays, I think that plays a little bit more of a part. I think the science of that is a lot more advanced than it was, 23 years ago or whatever. And but nah, it wasn't my deal.
All right. You talked way back in the day how you were kind of more on the end of the aggressive driver. How would you think of yourself as a sim racer?
No, I'm probably more conservative. I probably give more than I take, and I don't want to race angry. It's no fun. I mean, when you're in a car, that's your job. So I could care less about that guy. Care less. This is how I get paid, and this is what people expect out of me. And but in the game, it's still for fun. You want to do well, and it's very cool when you do. But I don't want to take somebody out, and I'm not, unless it's done to me. Now, don't mess with me, because I have no problem turning into the Hulk. But I don't want to be that way. So I try to race clean and fair, and I want to have good feelings afterwards. And so I don't really take it like that. And I don't want – if it gets to that point, I'll probably lose some of the fun out of it. I think that's some of the reason why I race in the league that I race in, because everybody races that way. And they have pretty strict rules. And I don't do like the official races, because you get those people. And it takes some of the – I don't want to get mad racing this. I'm doing this for fun.
Right. It was Dave Cater, an Oval guy, who said at a seminar I was at that in online racing, our only currency really is the respect that we give and get from each other.
Absolutely.
And that's one big giant difference between this and real life racing, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in real life, the team could care less that you are a nice guy. The results are what matter.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot of that when I went to Europe, and when I ran Formula 1 over there. It's the first time I ever been outside the country, and I learned really quick that it's kill or be killed. Doesn't matter if you're a teammate or not. And then when I came back to the States after that, I ran out of money and came back and raced. And the first time I got in a car here in the States, people were trying to race like nice, and I was like, they hated me. And I didn't care. I wanted to win, and maybe that's what helped me get along to my career. But now I don't want to race that way. I want to win, but I would rather finish second and be respected than win and have that guy, freak out on me and get mad. I don't get anything from that.
I totally understand that. I used to do competitive soccer and competitive bicycling, and I always said that it was never fun during the race or during the match, because it was work and an aggression level that maybe took me to a place that I don't even like being, maybe. Like you said, the Hulk. It was always fun after. Sitting back, having a beer, thinking about it, not during the moment. In sim racing, I find it a little bit... I get that way a little bit, but not to the same degree. That I'm always having a little bit more fun, I think.
Yeah, and that's what it should be. It should be fun. And I get, if I finish a race and let's say I finish 10th, but I knew I got the most out of me that race, okay? I come out smiling. If I finish 10th and I go, you know what, I made this mistake, that was stupid, I could have done better, then I'm upset. And I think when I get in the race, I'm trying to race more myself than anybody else. And in the end, you should have a good time with it.
Absolutely. In iRacing, I'm going to bring up your stats here real quick. No, not just show them, but no, the only reason I'm saying, I see you have like a 2489 iRating in road, which is right about where I am. And so this has been a humbling thing for me to get over in my iRacing career. And I'm a pretty darn good sim racer, and I'm a pretty good car racer in general. And yet, without like just 80 hours a week dedicated to the racing efforts, I find myself stuck somewhere between 2,400 and 3,000 iRating. And I think of that as being just average. And how long have you been at that 2,500 range? And how do you feel about the ladder system in iRating? And do you even think about it very much?
Yeah, I think people get more upset about it than others. And I think that's why I do more league racing than that, because that is so arbitrary. Sometimes I don't do many official races anymore. And I used to care, I was like on this quest to like get over 3,000, and then you'd have one bad race and then knock you way down, and you get really pissed off. And I think the system is okay. I don't think it's a real indication of how good a person is, because it really comes down to strength of field, right? So I have a job and a family and stuff, so I can only race when I can race. And if I get in a race and the strength of field is low and I still do well, I don't get much. But if I kind of hunt down those strength of field races and I do well and I get it's kind of a seesaw battle that I don't think is really that good to play. And but some people are into it, and that's cool. I could really care less. I just do it once in a while when I'm bored. Once our season ends, I might do a couple more, but I focus more on that Pacific Major stuff I run.
Okay. Do you do any of the big events? Like, have you done the Indy 500 at iRacing?
I'd like to. I want to do some of the endurance races, like with Michael and some of my other teammates, but I'm kind of still waiting for maybe that day-night transition to come around to where it's a little more realistic. I'd like to do the Indy 500, but every time it comes around, I'm either I'm busy. I don't either have the time to put into it, because I'm not just going to jump in and go, or maybe I'm working. It just as I'd like to, but I just haven't.
I totally understand that. When you get in that wheel-to-wheel battle in iRacing or in eSim, how does that moment compare to real life?
It's pretty intense. I mean, your senses are a little different. Even with the Rift, you can't really, it's hard to feel somebody next to you. So in the real world, you can I think you could run closer than you can in the game. But it's there. You still have the intensity, and the stress level goes up, and maybe you start sweating a little bit and things like that. But it's all there. Like I say, I tell everybody, this is, I miss racing a lot. People ask me all the time, "Oh, do you miss racing?" Of course I miss racing. I miss everything about it. And I don't miss the I'm a little older now. I'm 46, so maybe physically I don't miss the that part of it, and the financial part, obviously. But this replaces that emotional connection, and I get every satisfaction emotionally from racing this as I do in real life. And it's I love it. If I didn't have a job, if I didn't have to work, and maybe I was just a single person, I would do nothing but this.
I totally
not saying that's what I want, but I wake up thinking about it. I go to bed thinking about it sometimes, and it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. You mentioned sounds, and I'm so glad you did. Not just the engine sounds, but how much do you hear the other car nearby?
In real life?
Yeah, and in sim, I think there's certain things the sim has to give us to help us out, because we're missing so many real life aspects. So I sometimes wonder, do they push certain sounds excessively for my awareness, or how, blind or deaf are you?
I think it's pretty good. I mean, with the surround sound and stuff that you have now, if you have a good surround sound system in your headphones or whatever, it's pretty good. I think in real life, you just get a physical sense that somebody's there that you can't get in the game. Also, the smells, you don't get that. You can, those things you're always missing. But I think the simulation does a pretty good job at giving you that, but it's not the same. It just isn't the same when you're trying to squeeze somebody up against the wall and you can feel that they're there. Or in this, you kind of have to guess that they're there.
Right.
And so it's probably about 50%.
Do you ever use your F3 screen for that added awareness that where it's missing?
Way too much. I think I'd be better off just turning that off and not focusing on that too much, because sometimes I think that you're watching every corner and then it really messes with your head a little bit. So
yeah,
I think better off, but I can't help it. I want to see it. I want to see it all, but I can't help it. But sometimes it's hard. It'd be better. Like, I got to forget all that.
Right. What about the mirrors? Do you use the virtual mirror? And do you, in real life, in a champ car, Indycar, I mean, those mirrors are tiny, tiny little mirrors.
Yeah, you can't see crap out of those things. All you see is a blur because they're vibrating and stuff, and you might see a red car or a blue car. I think in the simulation, I use the real mirrors, because that virtual mirror to me is completely fake. The only time I've used it is when we did Eldora, and there's no mirrors on that car, and you got to kind of see what's going on around you. But in the other cars, I use whatever they're going to give us, I use, and I try to just ignore it as much as possible. I think in real life, honestly, the racing would be better if they just took the mirrors away altogether. I mean, in MotoGP and I think that in go-kart racing, the racing's so much better because you can't block somebody because you can't see him, and that guy has to respect you a little bit more because he can't see you.
Right.
And when I was racing Indy cars, we didn't even have spotters on the ovals. That wasn't even around yet. So, man, when you're running 3 wide, you personally had to use your own senses, and I think it gave a little more respect.
Yeah.
And a little bit, I think the racing was actually better.
And now they kind of depend on that added awareness, which isn't always right.
No, it's not. You got somebody up top telling you, all right, go high, go low, go high, go low. And it kind of ruins the racing, I think, a little bit, too. Too much blocking.
Yeah. We talked about the force feedback, and it sounds like they did a pretty good job there. One of my frustrations in life has been the pedals. How important are the pedals? And then I have a couple specific questions about pedal action as well.
I think whenever I meet somebody that wants to get into this, I tell them the first thing, the most important thing you buy is the pedals. If you buy cheap pedals with not a load cell, you're gonna be playing basically a PlayStation game. If you want to get real, and you got to be able to feel that, I think that's the biggest difference between the top guys and the mid-level guys, is being able to feel that braking power. I have average pedals. My teammate has like actual hydraulic pedals, and I haven't tried them, but he says it's night and difference. And I would guess that. I just can't afford to go buy $1,000 set of pedals. But maybe someday I'll get one. But that's probably the most important thing, is feeling the throttle and feeling the brake right through your foot, because that's how you do it in the real world, right? You feel that threshold braking. You want to be right on the limit of breaking loose that tire, of locking up the tire, but not locking it up, and you do it through your foot. And having those good pedals, really can help with your lap times.
Absolutely. Now, on the brake pedal in a real car, you have the pressure is the number one thing you're doing.
Yeah.
How many other sensations are you getting? When wheel lockup happens, do you feel it, or is it just in the wheel and what you sense everywhere else, or do you feel it in the foot?
You feel it in the steering, obviously, and mostly in the foot, and every driver's a little differently. I mean, the thing with the cars, you can change the size of the caliper. Everybody likes like a hard pedal, soft pedal, which you can do in this as well. And it's more of a personal preference, but you learn to feel it in the wheel. And that's the one thing with the force feedback getting better is feeling those lockups a little bit, especially in a closed cockpit car. That's the difference between a couple of tenths of a second, so, and that's everything. So, having that in the car, the brakes are everything in a car. When I teach at the school, at the Ron Fellows School, I tell everybody, if you can't control your brakes, your pressure, you will never be fast, because learning how to brake just enough without killing your speed, without locking the tire is, it's right on the edge, and that's the key to everything. In the game, I believe that's the same.
Yeah. If you looked at your steering traces on real life versus sim, how similar do you think your action on the wheel would be?
I think it's pretty similar. I find myself, and I've kind of paid attention to it a little bit, that I drive very similar to how I would in a real car, especially the braking, learning how to brake firm and then ease off. I'm really soft with the wheel. I always was. I like very little hand movement. If you're sitting there sawing at the car and stuff, you're not doing anything good. And you should be able to see that in the data. And you're not going to if you're in a race car, real car, and you're going through the corner. I mean, you ever watch Danica Patrick's in-car cameras, and she's awful at that. Her hands are just sawing back and forth. And, you should have better feel than that. It should be one motion, right? Turn in, turn out.
Right.
Turn in, turn out. Little corrections are fine, and that's the way it should be. And I think that in the simulation, it rewards that as well. So I try to mimic the same thing in the real world.
I mean, in a perfect corner, are we, obviously braking hardest straight line in, easing off into trail braking as we bring the wheel, and we should be turning the wheel all the way to the apex. In the moment of apex, we're doing everything the opposite, leaving the corner?
Absolutely. That's in a perfect world, yes. And it really comes down to controlling the balance of the car, right? Because when I go into the corner, I don't want the ass of the car up in the air, but I want a little pressure on the front. Learning how to come off that brake pedal just at the right time to where you don't lose the front of the car, but your minimum speed is up, is everything. And you find that in certain cars on the simulation, it rewards you, to doing just that. And yeah, absolutely, you're 100% correct. In a perfect world, yes, it's never perfect, but that's what you're striving for. Turn in. When you pass that apex point, we should be unwinding back on the gas, transferring the weight rearward. Yes, and you're fighting a lot of other forces in that, but yeah, in a perfect world, that's exactly what you're trying to achieve.
Awesome. All right, well, I want to bring things to a close, so a couple simple, basic ones on the way out the door here. Sure. Do you have a favorite real-life track?
Indianapolis by far, oval. There's nothing that rivals that. But on the road course side, Road America is very, very awesome because it's still a real track. It's not a parking lot. And I always enjoyed racing Surfers Paradise. And as a street track, it was by far one of the best street tracks we ever drove. Those are probably my three favorite.
Cool. And how does the Indy and iRacing compare both in visual and driving to real life?
Very, very, very close. And every time I drive it, I always comment to my teammates, man, this is just like it feels. When you have to pass somebody, losing the air on the front, learning how to just time it just right. It is exactly 100% exactly the same. Obviously, you don't have the sensation and your head's not bobbing around and the smell of the fumes and everything. But, the visual part of it, and the feel of the car is probably 95% there.
And how strong is the wheel, like going into one? I mean, how much power does it take to turn an Indycar at 200 plus miles an hour?
Well, nowadays, they've wimped out and added power steering, but when I was running no power steering, and I can remember running at Laguna Seca and going after the corkscrew, the left-hander. I can remember going through there. You have so much, 5,000 pounds of downforce, you physically could not turn the wheel. I mean, all your workout regimen was about your forearms and about your shoulders, and so and they dialed in the amount of caster to how strong you were. And on an oval, there's not much of that. It's more really finesse. You're kind of light fingertips through the corners. But on a road course, I mean, it was really, really hard physically to drive those cars. And nowadays they've eased that up a little bit. Doesn't mean it's not hard, but they eased it up, and that's cool. It makes it a little bit I don't know. I'd much rather see him go back to the old days, but I'm an old guy now, right? Isn't that what old guys it was always better
yeah,
back then?
we want all that. Can we get rid of all this electronics, hogwash, and ABS?
Yeah.
What's ABS?
I don't want gravel traps. I want concrete. I want factor.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Well, Richie, this has been a lot of fun. I honestly, I could go on for hours and hours and hours, but we're coming up. Well, we're at that 1 hour mark where I think is perfect time to bring things to an end anyway. So, it's been insightful. I mean, you've actually said some things that didn't even occur to me in comparing the two, and I really appreciate that. And it's great to see you having so much fun with sim racing, and you know, even being able to replace to an extent some of that competitive stuff that you needed in your life.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, and hopefully everybody enjoyed the show. Yeah, without this sim racing, I'd be searching for something to do. I mean, for the little amount it costs and the satisfaction and the fun you get out of it, you can't beat it. You can't beat it. Hopefully, it just more people get involved.
Yeah, I agree, and we're growing in numbers, and the whole esport thing will help us continue to grow in numbers as well. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Thanks again. Thank you so much for being here, and again, it was very insightful.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Hopefully, we'll do it again.
Awesome. So there you have it. Richie Hearn, sim racing versus real life racing. Great conversation, and just things that didn't even occur to me about situational awareness and just how good sim racing has really gotten over the years. And anyway, I'll thank him once again, even though he's no longer here. Thank you, Richie, for being here. It was a great show, great topic. Thank all of you here for being here. Some great questions from you, the pit crew, as well. Thank you so much to everybody. It was my pleasure, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with a new sim tunnel, it looks like. So it will be a while till another episode, but I hope you had fun with this one. This is the Simpit. I'm Sean Cole, and I'll see you on the track.